Groovy. Hi, and welcome to the fourth episode of Answer Engine Optimization, the Future of SEO. The hashtag for this series is SEO is AEO. I'd like to welcome everyone who's come along. I'd like to welcome the three guests we have, Ashley Burnham-Hale, Gennaro Cuafano, and Dave Ojeda. Thanks, guys, for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this episode is going to be spectacularly interesting. What I found phenomenal about it is I did my initial research and I thought, I wonder what I'll ask as questions. And I came up with a list of 5 or 6 questions. And all of those questions have now gone out the window because I found more interesting questions to ask. And luckily, we've got these 3 great people who really know their stuff, who will be able to answer them for us. Now, I'll introduce each of them in turn. Genarro, we can start with you. I know you did a site called the 4-Week MBA. But it's really about how do people make money out of their businesses.
Exactly. I think the key of understanding companies is really looking at the business model. So that's where I focus on and then for WordLift, I take care of the business development side. And with WordLift, we do SEO automation and especially focused on schema and knowledge graph.
Because the first time I actually came across you on the web, it was on one of your articles. I think it was no, it wasn't how Amazon make money, how Twitter makes money, I think it was. And I thought, how will he know anything about schema markup? And I was completely wrong, yeah?
Yeah, because I mean, the main part of my strategy also on the blog is based on schema and knowledge graph. So I mean, everything I do, it's really based on that. So behind the content, there is a strategy which is based on structured data and knowledge graph. So,
okay, and that's what I mean. WordLift is all about this kind of.
Exactly. We do automation. We use NLP tagging to actually automate the process of injecting schema through a JSON LD on the web pages, and we use open data sets such as DBpedia, Wikidata. So it's really our aim is to automate the process of creating schema markup, which as of now is still an advanced SEO strategy. In the future, we believe it's going to be something that everyone is going to need. So,
yeah, great. I actually just realized when you were talking there that there's another reason I'm going to love this episode is that we're going to say my name an awful lot. Every time we say Jason LD, I feel terribly happy.
Product placement.
Exactly. Plus, we have also a chatbot which is called Sir Jason Link, which I invite you to look at after the conversation. So if you want to talk with your chatbot version, you can actually ask Sir Jason Link. He's going to have an answer for everything.
Oh, great. Oh. Unlike me, because I don't have the answers to the questions I'm asking today. We're going to move on to Dave because he actually just said something. So I believe you're a real hands-on schema guy. You started as a programmer, then you went into digital marketing, and now you're with something called Hunch, and you're Mr. Schema Markup implementation guy. Is that right?
Well, and most days I am. My background's in organic SEO, so I've been doing that for 8-9 years now, and I've been doing a lot of exclusive work in structured data and schema for a little 2.5 years now. It's been something that's it's been growing, as we all know, and it's something that I really enjoy. And there's just a lot of interesting facets to it that it's always changing as you're looking how to represent websites properly.
Yeah, sure. And from what I understand, Gennaro's in Italy, and you're in America somewhere.
Chicago.
Oh, the Windy City.
Yes.
Lots of jazz and music-y things come from, and I'm a big music-y fan.
Cool.
So I'm going to come and visit you because I wanted to see Chicago because it's really cool.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I was getting myself an invite there. On to Ashley. We've met very briefly once before. You're in Colorado, but today you're in London. Is that right?
That's correct. Now, do you know what Colorado's famous for?
Springs.
Chicago.
Water.
Beer.
Oh, shit. My favorite drink.
So I think that there was some kind of a bet going as to who could get you to swear first. So the first $5 goes to me. But yes, beer and bicycles. I live in Colorado. It is a wonderful place to be. And we've got a lot of great tech people in Denver right now. But I am in London this week for work and then to head to Brighton SEO on Friday.
Okay, well, I'll be at Brighton as well. And we also had another bet, which is who could do the worst other person's accent. Oh, hot diggity dog, I'm a crazy galoot.
I have not been drinking enough. Yeah, no, you're going to have to get that for me at Brighton.
Yeah, okay, well, I win the bet. You owe me a Colorado beer. Thank you very much.
Fair.
Fair. Now we're going to move on to the actual presentation. Thanks a lot, you three, for coming along. A bit of fun there to get it all going. I know this is a very serious subject. It's a subject I've been incredibly interested in. And as I said, the more I've researched for this, the more I realize I don't know half as much as I should. So if we switch to the main screen, join the conversation. SEO is AEO hashtag. Please do post your questions in the chat box by the side of the YouTube. We want your questions because there will be questions answered at the end. And this is your opportunity to get these three super experts to answer questions that you won't get answered anywhere else. So take that opportunity like I am. I've got 7 questions with a super special 8th, which is the ongoing position 0 question. So stick around for that. Now, Schema Markup is cool. There's no doubt about that. Anybody who's watching this webinar must agree with the Schema Markup is cool. If you don't think Schema Markup is cool, stay around anyway, because you'll find out that it is. First thing is, Gary Ilias said, I want to live in a world where Schema Markup is not that important, but we currently need it. So we're moving somewhere where it isn't going to be necessary. But right now, Google needs it. So anybody who's using it is definitely giving themselves an advantage. And the better you use it, the better structured you can be, the better Google will understand. And that's where we're coming into this part of my little trio theory of relevancy, understanding, and credibility. If you've seen the first 3 episodes, or one of the first 3 episodes, you'll know what this is all about. If you haven't seen one, do go back and see them. This part we're looking at how we can ensure that Google understands who we are, what we offer. And to do that, we need to communicate. And I think a lot of SEOs and a lot of website owners, a lot of marketers forget that it's all about communication. It's not just with your clients. It's not just with your prospects. It's with Google. We need to communicate with Google so that it understands. And we need to communicate in a language that it can easily understand and digest. And that is Schema Markup. Here we have the main bases of Schema Markup. Things, creative works, events, organization, person, place, product, intangible, and action. You'll see in a moment why I've put intangible and action in gray. Because when you look at that, this phrase, these vocabularies cover entities, relationships between entities, and actions, comes from the Schema.org website. And that made me think, because I'm a little bit obsessed about knowledge graphs, that we can perhaps think about mapping Schema Markup to a knowledge graph where types in schema are entities, properties are attributes, nested types become relationships. I haven't ever dared say that to anybody today, up until today, but today I'm saying it to Gennaro because I know he's nice and he'll be kind to me. Does that equivalence flip, flop, or fly?
Well, that's a tricky one, but the knowledge graph alone, of course, doesn't fly. But what is powerful about knowledge graph is the fact that we are allowing the main search engines to look at the relationships that we are building up. For instance, just to give you an example, when we first spoke also on Twitter, I was showing the case of an entity that I created, which was answering to a query, which was with Gennaro Kofner, right? And then that entity entered in the Google Knowledge Graph. So how did I do that? In short, a few months before, I created a page where I was creating a set of relationships as I was allowing Google through the schema properties to read all the other social media accounts I had. So I was connecting all those information up with the website property, and with the SameAs, I was allowing Google to actually cross-reference my information. So the power of the knowledge graph is not just the knowledge graph itself, but it's the way it allows the information to be cross-referenced across several touch points, and that's what makes it very powerful, and that's what makes it fly, I think. So alone is not going to fly, but what makes it fly is the fact that you allow the search engines to really cross-reference all their information. I like to think of the knowledge graph as a modern version of an advanced sitemap for voice. It's a weird analogy, but I like to think as something that any website is going to need in the future, just to communicate the meaning. I mean, you said it right. Our aim. No, everyone is going to say why are you submitting your sitemap to Google? You're doing it because you want to let Google understand what pages are important and what not. So in the context of the knowledge graph, you want the search engine to understand the meaning of the site, the real meaning for you. So it's a way to tell your story behind what Google can understand of your website. I don't know if it makes sense, but I cannot tell you right now.
Sorry, what I really liked about that, sorry, was the end where it allows you to tell your story to Google. And this idea of telling a story is, I mean, it's explaining, it's educating. I use the word educating a lot, and I actually did a whole presentation based around my daughter when she was a kid about educating Google like you would educate a child. It needs reliable information from reliable sources, and it needs it to be confirmed multiple times, and it needs you to join the dots up, and that's what Schema Markup does. So, yeah. In short, what you just said is my super duper wonderful theory that I just said out loud is not very good, but it certainly brings up some interesting points that we can discuss. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Next up, this was going to be one of my questions, but then I realized it was rubbish and boring, but I thought I would put it in anyway. The additional type, which is something I found, and this is the Colorado connection, a beer shop. If you want to say that your shop is definitely only a beer selling shop, you can say you're a store. There isn't a schema type for beer store, but you can add additional type using productonology, which I can't say. And I like that, but in fact, it doesn't go much beyond that. So I decided instead to ask a question about SameAs. Now, here's an example from one of my clients who've done a very limited implementation of SameAs. They've just said what their social accounts are because they want to get the little social buttons in the knowledge panel on the right-hand side when they come up. That's fine. I think that's a little bit limited, and I think Dave is probably going to agree with me. Can you give us some groovy ideas for SameAs for companies, people, and products?
Sure. Well, one of the biggest things with SameAs, like anything with structured data, is going to be that you have a one-to-one relationship where structured data is for whatever is presented on the page. The biggest thing right now, as we see with using SameAs, is it's usually the social media accounts for the person, for the product, for the company. What I do when I look at with clients is look beyond that, because we can have other associations. For example, if you have people in the medical field or the law field, there are other associations or other organizations that that person or company is a part of that are strong organizations. So, it's two things. You would like to connect that through the SameAs, through structured data, but also because you have to have a one-to-one relationship with what is on the page, it gives you an opportunity to make a choice. Do I put this additional content, which is a link of American Medical Association that my doctor is connected with or my practice? It allows you to not only let Google understand through structured data, but gives you the chance to say, let me put this piece of content on there to make it more relevant when someone looks at that site and be like, okay, wow, they're part of that organization. That maybe in my mind starts to build a little trust for that product, that person, that company. So there is a way to kind of extend what is normally thought of for SameAs just in social media to beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, what I heard there somewhere in the mix, I mean, you're basically linking yourselves to associations, organizations, memberships that make you more credible. You're kind of piggybacking off their credibility.
Right, you're trying to go out there and just get another association, but the key is that making it a strong association, something that is worthy of a connection. Because I mean, you can have a company or a person can have tons of connections out there, but choosing what the strong ones are beyond the social media, sometimes for certain companies or products, they don't exist. They just don't have it out there. Maybe they should, but they don't. So it really becomes that you want to pick and choose, as opposed to let's just jam everything in there, kind of just comparing it to like keyword stuffing. Let's jam everything into SameAs as we can, and that's not what Google wants. Google wants relevancy. They want connections that stand out, that mean something. So that's why looking kind of cherry picking those possibilities is what I do for my clients in a way to go beyond social media links.
Okay, well, I think I've been guilty of overstuffing the same as. So I'll bear in mind what you just said and stop doing that. But I think what you also said there was sometimes they don't have a valuable same as to put in. Maybe they should. And I think now, we were talking about EAT before. It's actually getting people who have a reputation to write for your blog, for example, to bring yourself some expertise and authority, once again, piggybacking, and also for your product. If you don't have anything valuable to link it through, go out and find something, a great article or a write-up or something like that, perhaps.
Yes. I mean, I do agree with that, but with the article, I mean, that's not going to get you what you need for that connection for the same as. But I think that's anytime you can extend yourself out there and get people to see you and notice you, I mean, that's helpful. Does it directly affect this with the same as? Not really.
Okay, so be a little bit careful about same as. I've been overdoing it, getting a bit over enthusiastic. I think I will rein in my enthusiasm a little bit and be more reasonable. Thank you very much, Dave.
Sure.
Now, here's another thing, something I said in an article a year ago. I explained what the AI at ID is in an article I wrote on Semrush. I've given this before to Ashley. I'm wondering if I'm right. I mean, for me, we have, for example, a homepage. It can either be the page, the company, or the domain name. And I was suggesting that AID is something that we define ourselves, that identifies the entity, and we can choose it ourselves. Am I right? Am I wrong? Have I gone too far? Could you give us a quick description of what AID at ID unique URL identifiers are, and what the best practices are? Because I think I might have goofed.
Sure. I think it's a bit of both. So I think there's a tendency to both make it more complex than it is or oversimplify what it can be. So if you're looking at JSON-LD, the ID is really just a node, right? So I know I said that specifically for you. Don't worry, I'll talk about microdata for anyone that's named microdata. But it's really just a notification of, hey, here's a node, here's a resource, and it can be as simple as an IRI. So an internal resource, it could be a URI, or it could be the URL. So you have different ways of defining that data. It makes it fun, it makes it complicated. The biggest mistake I see with SEO is that developers are actually using this appropriately, calling out the separate nodes, but SEOs don't understand what it is. So for instance, if we were talking about Semrush, and we were talking specifically about you, I might use the hash sign from your main domain to you that's mentioned on the page. I see a lot of SEOs go out and tell their clients this is not an appropriate URL. Not a URL, it's an entity. So in that case, it functions differently than a lot of other types of structured data because it's not just a URL or it's not just a delimiter. So I think it's worth getting familiar with the different ways that people use it and what it means. So you are right in that it can identify the thing on the web page. It can identify the web page. It can identify just the URL. It can identify the domain. There's lots of separate ways to use it. And you'll hear it called at ID for JSON-LD, but for anyone that uses microdata, it's the item ID, or if you're using RDFA, it's known as, I believe, resource. So the same thing is used across the various different languages, just so you know what we're talking about. I like JSON-LD, but it's not the be end all. It doesn't have to be the most important thing. So I do think you should use it. Entities are the backbone of what we're doing here, right? It's almost like full circle from XML back to where we are today, where we're trying to make those different relationships I don't know, just easy to define and see how we all relate to each other. So this to me is a building block. Just be good as an SEO. So I think that's usually our audience. This would be one place where I recommend you talk to the developers and how they're using it and how they understand it, and that you, I don't know, brush up a little bit on your knowledge as well. I think this is a commonly misunderstood one.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, I was looking at it and people were saying use, for example, in the example I just showed, mailjet.com #corporation. Mm-hmm. I find the hashtag is, my opinion is, it's not a good idea because it can be an anchor. So it would be an anchor to a part of the page, which would then necessarily have to talk about the corporation, and people don't do that. But if you use a subdomain, for example, corporation.mailjet.com, and then product.mailjet.com, and use subdomain systematically, and you never put anything else on there, then it becomes a unique identifier for that entity, which is on a site you control. Is that silly? Is that useful? Or is that just me overdoing it and getting a bit stressed out about something that isn't so important?
B. I don't think you need to stress about this, because in this case, it's not like our usual understood practice of creating anchors on a URL. It's really just saying, this is the page, but we're talking about something else. So, I mean, generally speaking, you wouldn't anchor it to the organization header, even if that's on the page. It's literally just defining the entity and what that page is referring to, that node. Because you might have a page that has several different nodes. You might want to use those IDs across your website, or these are also really good at pointing back to the identifier from different websites. So if I'm sharing content on your blog, I'll use my ID, and I might point back to my ID to a biography page I have on my own site, but that's not actually a link to, or it's not actually an anchored page. It's just recognizing me as the shared entity.
And I assume the vital thing is to be coherent and consistent.
Coherent is overrated. But yes, ideally consistency is good. I'm sorry, you're just going to keep getting irreverence from me. Appreciate the invite though.
And quick question for Dave. Sorry, is it worth in SameAs linking back to your free base or your Wikidata reference?
No, that would be for additional type. That you would add an example there, but the Wikidata, Wikipedia, that would be additional type that you'd be utilizing that with, that association.
Okay, so additional type was much more interesting than just the beer shop example.
They're all interesting, and to a certain degree. It depends what we want to talk about, or how much beer we've had during the
Good point. From Colorado, especially.
Yes.
I'm really bringing down the level of intellect in this conversation. You guys, beer's on me.
Oh, I do apologize. Next question is, we're moving on to actions and skills. Now, I heard a few months ago that Alexa was using Schema Markup as default skills. That if the skill didn't exist for something, but they could read it from Schema Markup, they would do so. And then Google said that they were doing the same thing. So basically, I'm wondering now, if Schema's feeding actions and events, A, how is it doing, especially for Amazon, who don't crawl the web as far as I'm aware? And if we can just use Schema Markup, why bother creating actions and skills, which seem to be a bit like applications, costly, heavy, and likely not to be picked up by your core prospective audience? Gennaro.
Yep. So I'm not muted, right? Okay. So basically, we had to make a distinction here. Of course, when it comes to the actions, I think we're moving toward the phase in which those have become critical to allow a website, especially the APIs of a website, to speak to several devices, right? Of course, the step is not immediate, right? If you're using structured data, or if you're using like actions on your site, then, for instance, let's think of Google. What is the first step? You first have a structured data, then you can claim your Google directory page, and then the next step is going to be like a Google action. In the case of Alexa, it's going to be an Alexa skill. So of course the step is not immediate, but it's critical, because definitely the schema action is going to be what will allow us to move to that phase in which the JSON LD is going to be explaining what the website is about, and so it's going to allow those APIs of the website to actually communicate through those devices. So of course it's still underutilized, and it's something that I think it's critical. So it makes sense, but again, it's not a step which happens right away. So, but the first step is definitely structured data using the schema actions. And as for an interesting thing, actually, that we were looking at also at a case where actually right now there is really a battle between this may be a theory, of course, but there is really a battle for who is able to get more space, of course, on the search results pages. So that's been going on for years. And the thing is, with actions, definitely with the website, you can, let's think your case. You have a song on the website, right? You want your listeners to listen to the song. with action, you actually trigger that kind of action from the search results. So you let the user take that kind of action on the search results. It's not going to be automatic, of course. It depends if Google is gonna have it in the search results. But of course, there is the first step, and that's something which is critical. As the web is not anymore just a place where you find information, but you want users to take actions, you want users to meet intentions, also commercial ones. Definitely, the schema action probably may be that bridge. So what is going to allow us to move forward that kind of direction. So I think it's critical.
So schema markup is a means of communication. That's a wonderful way of putting it, and it's only one step in the aim of actually having that communication. We communicate with the machines. To have that, the machines then communicate it to their users is another step on top of that. But we can't have that second communication if we don't communicate through schema to start with.
That's the foundation, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, communication is going to be way more fragmented in the future. We can imagine, with all the devices that we're going to have, especially with voice, and probably schema, of course, is going to be the foundation. Then probably other vocabularies will be on top of schema, other ontologies, as you said, Alexa also uses a sort of schema ontology, and so that's the foundation. That's the first step toward that direction.
Yeah, I mean, so this first episode in this kind of technical structured data part is about the foundation of what we need to do. Yeah. The next one takes it into a slightly simpler area, but underused, that is very powerful, which is semantic HTML5 accessibility and information architecture, which I'm really keen to look at next week. And then the last one is exactly what you're talking about. The next step in structured data in an unstructured web. This is phenomenally complicated. And what can we do to help Google understand? How can we communicate with our terribly unstructured data? I actually read an article today. I can't remember the name of the author. I'm terribly sorry, but talking about knowledge graphs within enterprises, i.e. companies that have their own knowledge graph. And that seems to me phenomenally interesting, because that then allows them to leverage all this information into formats that Google can digest.
Well, that's what we do with WordLift. I mean, we automate the process of creating a knowledge graph within your site. So we inject the schema. Schema is the first step, but the main aim is really to have a site which has a knowledge graph which is independent from Google. Because of course we know that Google might take that information from your knowledge graph, but then if you are locked in by Google, so if you allow Google to just build its own knowledge graph and you're not building yours, there is an issue. We're giving total control to the search engine, which we don't know how it's going to end up, and Google is going to give us a business model which is going to be mainly given by Google. So with the knowledge graph, we have an option. In the future, who knows? Probably we can connect those knowledge graph to a blockchain. I don't know any other ways to monetize the knowledge graph, but there is a way out also to not get locked in by Google.
That's absolutely brilliant. In fact, that wasn't a plug. I didn't know that's what WordLift did. The article was actually completely unconnected, but it was a nice plug without wanting to be a plug. For me, that's phenomenal. I do like the idea that maybe perhaps we can relieve ourselves a little bit of our entire dependency on Google. Next up, there's a link, and Alexis Sanders. I'm terribly sorry. I saw Alexis talk at BrightonSEO in April. She did a talk about advanced and practical structured data. I've put the link there so you can go to her slide share. It was really, really, really interesting and gave me a lot of the questions that I initially had for this particular episode, and I've kept some of them. That if this episode is missing anything, it's probably in her presentation. But now we're moving on to Speakable Specification. A lot of people are talking about that. There are two things here, one of which is Speakable Specification has not been validated by Schema yet, and yet Google is already saying, yes, we do support this, we will use it. The second is that I saw this piece of code with CSS selector, headline summary, and then if we look at the next one, hashtag my head, hashtag the summary. What I found incredible there is I was repeating the text. I was pulling the text out of the page and putting it back into the speakable part in inverted commas in quotation marks. But in fact, you can just reference the ID or the CSS selector. But that, once again, is something that isn't officially supported on Schema, but Google is officially supporting it and is now using it for the Google Home. I suspect that's because they can't wait. Impatient like I can be, and like a child would be, is saying, I really want this now, so they're going to use it anyway. We then move on to all these voice-related, other than the speakable action, these already being in place, the voice-related schema markup, how to direction, how to section, how to step, comments, answers, questions, reaction. And on the right-hand side, we've got all the actions and reactions, which is things I would assume these voice assistants or these assistants can do, i.e. they're actions that can be taken by these machines, or actions that we have taken that they can then understand, for example, a like action. All of this is related to voice search, the voice assistants. And the question now for Ashley is, it's really good fun to play with. I mean, I like playing with it, and I've seen Barry Schwartz having a play with some speakable content that he got Google Home to read back to him, and it looked like a lot of fun. What about for businesses in real life? What's this going to bring to the table?
Yeah, let me see. So I do not think that voice is everything to most businesses yet. And I think that it is premature to put a lot of stock into it unless you have a very specific business plan and you have the support and finances of both your dev team and your marketing team. So I think everyone wants to touch it and are not sure what to do with it yet. I think that there are some really specific use cases that are interesting though. So if you're a content person and you have this marked up, you can be read back. That's fantastic. If you're an e-com, something like that, it gets a little bit more complex. So it's easier to mark up the product description, but it's difficult to browse in voice. That's where a lot of these actions can make a lot of sense, because if people want to do anything in voice, it's be able to initiate sending a package back or asking for a refund, to be able to initiate a call to customer service, or to be able to leave a review on a product. Users are getting more into that and find it more accessible than just browsing for something on voice. So I think that in general, businesses just need to have a great site and good content that's readable. That's the best way to prepare. Obviously, structured data is a part of that. But I think if you do want to get into some ways to test that, these type of, speakable identifiers and schema are a great way to get started. I think one cool test would be, that I haven't seen done, would be to have something, say, if you are an e-com site, a deal of the week page, if you can go and mark that up and then be able to test on a voice, what is the dillards.com deal of the week? And I can go and look at the products, or it can read to me the description and the price. So that would be a fun way for a business to start getting involved with a very low cost overhead or any sort of dev overhead, just to see how it just sort of susses out and how people are using it. But the speakable asset is great. It's not part of the core vocabulary. It's a pending extension, but it's on there and it's documented. And more than anything, I think that skills and actions are wicked cool, but it's tough to develop. It's when you want something to be mobile friendly that's available for all devices versus making a native app that takes a lot of time and money to do correctly. So structured data can really bridge the gap there. And schema.org isn't owned by Google. It's independent. All different types of browsers support it versus actions and skills. So as far as accessibility, I think it's the way to go. If you are going to play with it, the cool thing about voice assistive schema is that the markup, you can do it with the CSS like you're showing, which is brilliant, or you can just do the ID values, so for that part of the page. But you can also do it with XPath. So we're starting to see more of a resurgence of folks using XML to feed their information to different places, especially because it gets it out there quicker. And I think it's really useful depending on what kind of voice devices we're using. I think about watches or Android Auto and what kind of information is going to be more useful to them. But you can write an XPath, which is similar to regex, just to say, hey, these are the parts that are speakable. So Google can really cherry pick from a whole repertoire of information.
Wow. I didn't know most of that. I really love that answer. I mean, what comes out of it from me is that right now, in terms of actually making money, speakable markup isn't particularly useful. However, on the path to learning about a product or in interacting with the company either before or after the purchase, it is very useful potentially. And we'll see how all that develops. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
One more thing to add. Sorry, I had the URL. I can drop it in the chat, but Google has a new speaking action format where you can express interest. You guys might know it off the top of your head, but essentially it's almost like a paid service like Google Shopping, where they'll tie in your feeds. They will go out and promote what you can for shopping and for voice, and they'll help you get your products and help you get the workflow out there. And in turn, I think they get a piece of your sale. So if I remember correctly, it's brand new. I think I looked last week, and there's a form to express interest, but nothing else. I will drop it in the box, though, and hopefully you can share with everyone. space, didn't put it in notes, but I think it's a really cool way that Google's trying to get more businesses on the voice platform. Because really, you can say you like it, but when you start it, it's difficult to know exactly where to start in an impactful way. If you're like every other business, you have a shitload of things that you want to do, and there's just never enough time and money.
Okay, that was the second swear word of the day.
Thank you.
One each.
Or you're welcome.
Yeah, so I mean, actually making money out of all this at the moment is very unclear. It's not actually affecting the bottom line. It's fun to play with. Perhaps not something that people should be investing, or companies should be investing immense amounts of money in. Now, this question, we just added it a couple of minutes before because Dave was talking about some of the work he's been doing, and I found that incredibly interesting. So the design is horrible, worse than usual. Schema is part of the site design planning process. So Dave was talking earlier on about building a site with schema in mind, i.e., I mean, I have clients who come to me and say, oh, we've just built this site, what about the SEO? And I say to them, actually, you should have thought about the SEO before you started building the site. Dave's now saying you should not only think about the SEO in its more general sense, traditional sense like I would, but think about the schema. Can you give us some pointers? Because what you were saying earlier was incredibly interesting.
Well, thank you for that compliment, first of all. And so
pleasure.
what I was getting at, I agree with what you're saying there is, when you're doing a site for the first time, you're building that foundation, your architecture, looking at it from an SEO perspective is a great opportunity. But what you do is by adding on, looking at through the lens of schema, trying to understand where the connections are, where the relationships, it helps you to kind of think like, where is this content going to be in relationship to schema, which, it's both things, utilizing the SEO perspective and the schema perspective. While they can both be the same, there will be instances where one will matter more than the other. For instance, example I was talking about previously is, a service page, which was, it should have been just a list of services, but yet it was talking about their main service and spilling out into other services, and it was really confusing. So, from that perspective, it was confusing from a person looking at that page. And then, for someone like me or the rest of us kind of looking at sites and trying to like, how do I describe this in schema? It's confusing for us as well. So to take that and be like, well, why don't we separate out and make it purely an offer catalog of services, and then from there talk about the other services just specifically on other pages. So it gives you an opportunity to enhance what you're doing from an SEO perspective, but give you the advantage of covering your bases as far as schema. So going back to the thing where I was talking about with the SameAs, that example gave you opportunities to look back at your site and be like, well, am I representing everything on the site that I should? Is there another great organization or some sort of profile somewhere else that will help me as well on converting, as well as connecting me in my site or the person on the site or an organization? So once again, schema is great, and a lot of people that look at schema just look at like, I have schema that I have to slap on what is there. But what we're trying to talk about is do the reverse. Look at the option of keeping that in the planning stages. And when you're looking at a site, look at how that connectivity can help to enhance not only schema, but also the site in terms of the layout and the content.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, that whole idea of, in fact, saying, I've got a catalog page with a list of products, here's the links to all the products. As an example, it gives you a good oversight of what it is you're actually building and the architecture of it. I'm terribly keen on schema markup. The more we talk about Gennaro, talking about communication, you talking about the architecture, it really makes sense to me that this is now a fundamental building block of the websites that we're building today for tomorrow. Next one is something that Ashley wanted to talk about a little bit, which I'm actually incredibly interested because I've got a client who needs it. So we won't say who that client is because then they won't know I stole the idea from you, and I can pretend it was my own idea. The job posting markup. How does it work, and when's it coming to Europe? Your microphone.
I'm on mute. Yeah. For good reason, because I do like to talk, right? So the job posting markup is something I'm really excited about just because Google's trying a few different things. I know earlier this year we saw, Google Employ and a lot of the rich features around job posting come into the US. It is my understanding that they were aiming to be available in hundreds of countries at the end of this year or early next year. If there is a specific country, I can go ahead and take a look at what's being covered or not and hopefully get some answers for you there, but it's expanding pretty rapidly.
France.
Give me a minute. I can't do two things at once.
Okay.
And then I will look that up for you. But it takes the rich results to the next level. So it allows users to go and see this aggregated job search data, but then to go and filter, they can sign in, they can save jobs that they're interested in, they can get alerts. I mean, there are a lot of cool things that you can do with it directly in the SERPs, which I think relays a lot to your AEO that you talk about for the single results. And there are a few ways that businesses could take advantage of it. So if you are a business and you're interested in this, I'm guessing you are, we know that at least in the US, we have a lot of jobs available. We're always looking for new employees. So job posting becomes pretty profitable or can be a big resource suck. But you want to make sure that the page that you have is available, that you've got all the job posting markup available, that you have an option to apply on the page, and that it's indexable and test. So it's almost the same with any other markup. But Google can do a really good job of extracting different pieces of that for the posting. So whether it's the employer, the position, I think there's a couple others, God forbid, job posting, occupation, and employer ratings too. So they're going to go ahead and pull information from your page and where they can apply, but also ratings about your company. This is another area where I think a lot of businesses were upset talking about how Google might steal rankings from them. But specific to jobs, Google is working hard to not circumvent, but to prioritize the owners of those jobs. So to get the companies that are hiring up higher than just a LinkedIn or a Monster.com or any of your regional job postings. So those are certainly useful, but if you have the posting available on your site, they're working pretty hard to show that at the top, which I think is a really good show of goodwill for Google, because it's easy for them, algorithmically to just bypass that.
Sure.
And then
so I'm gonna get onto this client, and we're gonna get this started now because it's going to come for the end of the year. One thing you did say is employee reviews. I know that's something that a lot of employers are worried about, and it's for me it's the second stage after customer reviews. People are saying, customer reviews, how frightening. But you're saying if you've got a good service, there's no reason to have a bad customer review, and we're ending up in that situation now where employers hopefully will be in a situation where they need to treat their employees with respect, and in order to maintain their credibility in terms of being an employer, to be able to appear in the results further down the line. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, we need to do the right thing by people. I'll add one more feature that's unique to the jobs posting that I hope expands to others posting is, with their indexing API, Google allows you to submit directly to API to tell when a job posting is expired, so they can remove it from those rich snippets directly. It's really fantastic. It's really sexy if you're into structured data, but to be able to ping them directly and say to remove something is awesome. As far as I know, they're just testing it out on this, and it's pretty small. I think it's something like, 50,000 lines of postings that you could do at a time. So XML sitemaps are going to work for most people, but if you are interested in playing around with that API, Jobs has new features where you can test it out.
Okay, super. You just said the word sexy. I used that for the next episode, which is going to be with Simon Cox, who's actually just written in here. He says schema markup isn't cool. It's essential. I
think that's fair. I don't know. Well, I mean, we're all here because we do boring things. I don't know about you guys, but
I think it's sexy and cool, and
we love it. A special audience.
Right. Okay. Hosted. I've just had to skip a frame because I forgot to remove it from the last one. We were actually talking about the pending extensions. Using those, obviously, we can use them. It's a little bit dangerous in the sense that they may change and we need to update it. But I think one of you was saying earlier on, a lot of the people working in this field, like you three, are already much further ahead than Google in terms of what you're doing in schema markup compared to what it can actually digest, which I find incredibly interesting. But that's all part and parcel of the game. So the big question that's going to be hopefully a little bit of a debate. We don't use schema.org as a quality factor. Alexis Sanders said, feature snippets appear when Google has high confidence in the usefulness of a response. Structured data can support confidence. And Dawn Anderson said in one of the previous episodes, then they fill the gaps from web pages, and presumably the more structured, the better. So schema is not the quality factor, but here we're on the right-hand side, two experts are saying, we're looking at confidence and credibility, and the more structured, the better in terms of, in this case, getting hold of a position 0. So schema helps rankings directly, indirectly, or only in my dreams. We can start with Gennaro, I think.
Well, I wish to say only in your dreams. No, but it's not right. I think there are like several ways that the schema affects the ranking. Directly, of course, if you get into the knowledge vault, you know that you're going to get right away like a knowledge panel, and then it's going to bring you a lot of traffic. I mean, some of it, of course, is going to be no click through. I mean, it's going to become a no click search, but in other cases, it's going to become qualified traffic. And directly, of course, in other ways, because if you when you implement schema, you get more space on the search results pages. For instance, let's think of the case of events schema markup, where the richer experience on the search results shows, like, for instance, more information about that event, which might improve the click-through rate. So that's an indirect way. There is a third one, which is, I think, very, very interesting. Probably you're going to be discussing with the person which mentioned it in the first person, which is Bislasky. In an article in June about augmentation queries, Bislasky has highlighted how for synthetic queries, because we know that one of the main aim of Google is not just to give an answer to a search result, is also to understand what would be the best synthetic query, so a query that Google creates which would match the best result that it could give to the user. And in selecting those synthetic queries, it seems that, of course, it seems based on this patent that Google looks for structured data on the web as well. So in a way, when you have structured data, you're not only improving the search results because you're giving more information to Google, but in a way, you're also creating demand. So you're creating queries, because you're allowing, like, it's my case. I created the query with Gennaro Quofan, who cares? I mean, but Google now has it because might have it because there is structured data behind. So that's interesting. I'm going to share it in the channel. I think that one is an interesting one to look at. So yeah, 3 ways: directly if you get inside the knowledge vault, and directly through the click-through rate, and third aspect, you may be creating demand through the structured data through schema.
Super duper, wonderful stuff. Great, wow. We'll move on to Dave, who hasn't said anything for a little while. Directly, indirectly, or in my dreams?
I agree on all the points that Gennaro had said, and my answer would be directly and indirectly. Directly being the whole issue of rich results. Then you getting the rating stars, you're getting the product price. All of that will help in terms of being able to click through. But indirectly, I think the bottom line with position 0 is going to be if structured data is going to help Google to understand what that topic is about, what that page is about. Indirectly, will that help in terms of when it comes to looking at the algorithm and what it decides in terms of who's going to be position 0? Then I think that there's a positive benefit there. Indirectly, we can't track it, but I think it's there, and they've made mention before a couple different times within the last year about how structured data helps Google to understand. So just taking it for face value is something that I think that it's something that we should be doing, and it helps in a variety of ways. I will say one last thing with rich results. I think with aggregate rating, that's probably one of the biggest things that's being spammed at this time, and I talk to clients about this all the time. And so I think that with aggregate rating, I think that, and basically the stars on the results, it's going to be something that I think Google is going to get a handle on in the near future, and kind of get everyone into line. And bring it out of the wild, wild west. But that's my tangent, just because I talk to people about the rating stars all the time. So apologies for doing a sideline like that.
No, they also have manual penalties for spammy schema markup. I had a client come to me asking why they'd got this penalty, and it was all down to marking up reviews on articles that were not real reviews and that were obviously cheated. From what I've seen, Google have already started to kind of wag the finger and become a little penguin-esque, if we may. So I would have thought penalties for spammy schema markup are definitely on the horizon. And lastly, on to Ashley for the question, directly, indirectly, or in my dreams?
Sure. I think it maybe helps gently, but I don't put a lot of stock into it affecting ranking because schema won't overcompensate for stuff that you're doing on your site that isn't right, or if you don't have authority, or if you're not answering specific questions. And conversely, Google will show rich snippets for sites that don't have any schema on them at all. If they know that they're an authority and they can parse the information on the page just from good architecture and understanding what's on the page, they'll show the users what they want to see. So I think that it's something that you should be doing both in terms of readability and exposure. Good schema can help your stuff show up in a variety of places versus just the web, but I think that you need to make sure that your value prop on the site is already there and that you've got the good content and everything else. So I don't see it as a huge ranking boost yet, but I see it as something you should be doing and doing well and doing honestly. So
basically, I'll have a very bad night's sleep tonight because I won't be dreaming of Schema Markup. That's wonderful. Great answers. My personal opinion is maybe not for ranking, but certainly in credibility, certainly in understanding. And if we're looking at the knowledge graph, everything's about understanding there, and after understanding, it's about credibility. So I think I will sleep well because I do think it helps. Next is our last question, which is rolling on from the second episode where Dawn and Eric came up with some great theories about position zero. So I've started the position zero profile for this series. So far, we have 4 points: knowledge graph first, then the best of the top 10 results. The answer algorithm on top of a search algorithm, i.e. Google is building an answer algorithm on top of its original search algorithm. Google's looking to become, or to find, an ultimate source of truth for each question. And Rebecca Senton said that user signals are crucially important in terms of getting that position zero. So back to Gennaro, in terms of position zero, what can schema bring to the table that we can add to this list?
Well, from a few experiments we've done, it's clear that schema can really give a great help in terms, especially when you're trying to answer a specific like long tail keyword. In that case, at least we saw in many cases schema helps a lot. I mean, especially when it comes to the feature snippets positioning, definitely in our strategy, schema is the foundation. I mean, as I was telling you, also my blog, each time that I try to position a long tail keyword, which also has a large volume, I do it by using schema as a foundation. So I think it's very, very important for one simple reason, though. Just going back to what we were saying before, like schema alone is not like really the answer. The answer is we're allowing Google to cross-reference the information that we give, and that's where we think the information might be more easily comprised in Google Knowledge Vault, because Google, of course, is looking for information from several perspectives. It's not like you tell me something and I'm gonna include it in my knowledge graph. So what we do with schema and with the schema properties is to actually reference to information and data sources and that Google can cross-reference before it can be comprised in its knowledge vault. So that's the key, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, something you said comes back to the thing I was saying about educating children. It's not just because one person tells you that you're going to take it as being fact. It needs to be cross-referenced, reaffirmed by trusted sources. And words that are coming out more and more are things like cross-referencing, communicating, digesting, educating, and explaining. So, Dave, for position zero, anything that schema can bring to the table?
I agree on the long tail because I've seen it in experiments and doing with clients that schema and structured data markup for long tail is beneficial. But once again, I think this goes back to the other point that Ashley was saying, is that good content, good architecture, connecting within your site. I mean, I think that right now, currently, that's the foundation, and structured data, what can add to it is just a small component and something that I think will grow in the future. But for right now, I think if you only have so much time and money with your clients, and when they're developing, creating content, I think that it goes back to looking at those core foundations that Ashley mentioned, working with those, making sure those are sound, and using schema kind of as a reinforcement to that. And that's where I see schema in its place here.
sorry, schema, great content with schema as reinforcement. Wonderful stuff. Absolutely perfect. Ashley, your quick last answer. I see that you're really keen to answer the questions. So we'll be quick about this and then we can move on to the questions.
Yeah, no, I think that honestly, Dave and Gennaro captured it. So I won't wax on about that. And yeah, I was just trying to figure out the best way to make sure that we're responding to folks who are taking the time to add chat to the video, because there are some really great comments.
I've seen you've answered a few questions directly in the chat. That's great. That's really kind of you. I would do it, but A, I don't know the answers, and B, I'm desperately trying to juggle the 3 computers here. Thank you very much. In fact, that is the answer. Now we can go to questions, but thank you all 3 of you. I've been overwhelmed with information, and I'm kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to have to watch this back now because to try and get all that information in. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Gennaro, and thank you, Dave.
Thanks for bringing the 3 of us together as well. It's been
amazing. It's been a really great experience, guys.
Thank you, Jason.
So now we're looking at questions. We've got maybe 10 minutes. I actually think that Ashley's answered pretty much all of them.
Actually, can we, I don't know, Gennaro, your comment on the vocabulary, I really enjoyed. I don't know if that's something you could cover real quick here, because I liked that answer a lot.
Yeah, so the question was, do I need vocabulary for my site? And the answer is, of course, if you're trying to build a knowledge graph, the answer is yes, because based on the vertical that where you're trying to build your knowledge graph, then you're going to need to curate the data that you're creating. Of course, if you start from the schema properties, that's the first step, but then you need to be curating that data as much as possible. So you need to be adding, as much information as possible about the description of that entity. You need to be adding additional properties. So you need to make sure that you have a unique data set, which eventually is what matters, what we think it matters in terms of, really SEO. Not just SEO. Of course, SEO is a short-term gain, but also in long-term, you want to have that kind of infrastructure. So having a controlled vocabulary within a site, I think it's might be the most effective way for probably not for all the sites, but for most of the verticals where you're trying to build a knowledge graph. So if you want to go behind schema, so if you want to build like a knowledge graph which is solid, which is something that you can rely for your future, not just SEO strategy, for your voice search strategy and everything else. So.
Super. That was great. From what I understand, Ashley really knows what the questions are. What other questions have you seen come through, Ashley?
One that I saw that William Rock mentioned was just less of a question, but more talked about the missed opportunity of not using local markup and local schema, and would love to reiterate that just because we've seen some examples, some great examples of clients who might have multi-locations that aren't doing a good job of marking up their businesses and their hours and content on those pages that then aren't showing for those local searches, which, mobile's going up and local is essentially the intersection of mobile and search. So if there's a way to highlight, and I don't know if you want to do this post fact or if you have an article coming up specific on local markup, I think there would be a great appetite for that. And I think that's, if you have a brick and mortar, that's something you should absolutely look into.
And I'll speak to that a little bit because I do a lot of clients with local. Is the biggest thing too is understanding how their organization is set up. Is there multiple local businesses with no clear cut where's the headquarters, as opposed to going with there's a main organization that has local businesses underneath it. So the structure of local businesses when they're the it's something that you really have to make a choice of which way you're going to go. For instance, like if you have medical practices, there's really not one of the 10 medical practices in Chicago that are the main one. So in that case, it would be multiple. You just have multiple local businesses, not necessarily underneath the umbrella of an organization. I think, in fact, and I'll try to find it, Schema App did a great article on that in terms of really defining your organization type and how you set up for local businesses. And I'll try to find that if I can and put it in chat.
That's cool.
Super. I've just seen that Martha Van Berkel has said, define entities easily by using Wikipedia definitions too. Who knows what she means?
I'm sorry, could you say again?
Martha said, define entities easily by using Wikipedia definitions too.
Yeah. She was referring to the additional type. that we talked about, additional type using Wikipedia, Wikidata, and using that for further clarification. I think there's a question for me back here that was from Jeannie Hill.
If I can add something very, very, very quickly, on that. So that's our default settings. For instance, with WordLift, we bring in information from datasets such as Wikidata and DBpedia, which in a way is a description coming from Wikipedia if you don't want to build up a controlled vocabulary within a site, which is an option and it works. But in other cases, of course, you start from there. There is the foundation that you can build up on that foundation to create and curate your data as much as possible.
Super. So, Dave, continue with what you were saying.
Oh, and it looks like in the chat there was a question, and then it just.
It was: are you only using schema aggregated rating if a business has its own review rating system?
Right now, that's what I'm recommending for clients, is they have their own rating system in there.
Really?
Right now, because at this point, the way Google's going, they're really pushing for the ratings to be coming and created on the site themselves, as opposed to pulling them down from Google My Business, which they don't like, even Trustpilot and so forth. So I'm seeing where the future is leading for Google, is they want it to be created and organic within the site itself. So that's where I'm having conversations with clients now in terms of looking at that option, because that's not necessarily an easy change for clients, or a cost that they want to add to their site or to their marketing budget. So it's definitely hot conversations currently happening.
Oh, can I ask a question then, following on from Jeannie's question, which is, from my point of view, I've imagined that, for example, Trustpilot brings a third-party validation to what I as a company is saying, which is I'm the best. So having a validation of my organization through something like Trustpilot or another platform, and then having my own rating system for my own products, would that be viable, or is it there's no point in having Trustpilot at all?
There isn't a definitive right now. I think that the conversations people are trying to have with Google, with John, he seems to be alluding to the fact that basically, and the documents seem to point in that direction, that they want it being created on the site itself without the third party. And so, at that point, I'm on the side of going on the conservative in terms of SEO in general. So looking at seeing what is the best option for them that is going to be kind of future-proof them moving forward, versus kind of taking a risk and then having to come back and make some changes later, or getting a schema penalty. I'll go with the conservative every time, and maybe it means that they hold off for a couple months or 6 months. But conservative works best for clients in my case.
Oh, okay, great stuff. I tend to be a bit on the other side of being less conservative and throwing myself in a critical manner. That was my American accent again.
That was a terrible accent. No excuse for that, Jason.
Okay, no, there is no excuse. I'm sorry. I'll stop. Ashley, are there any more questions?
There are a few other questions. I'll try to make some of them quick. There was a question from Worth specific to the API and where it's part of the schema. Just to clarify, that was just job schema specifically, but there's a link that should be coming through the chat. William Rock had some great questions around reviews, which probably should be taken offline because they're pretty extensive. And then I just wanted to say that there was a brand new person who had never done any of this named Mercy, who was on the chat, and that's just cool to see people jumping in and asking good questions. If there are any additional questions, I believe the three of us are pretty easy to find, either on Twitter. I'm also a Google Top contributor, so feel free. I'll open the invitation for myself. Ask me any questions. Dave, Gennaro, you may not want that as well, but as far as I can tell, everyone in this community has been really good about sharing their time and expertise.
100%. Maybe Anton could put the blue screen full screen again so that everyone can write down the Twitter handles. Then anybody who does have questions specifically related to anything any one of us has said, a good idea to reach out through Twitter. I think that's about it. Thank you 100 million times to all three of you. That was really great. As I said, this is one where I learned an awful lot, and I haven't managed to process it all yet. Luckily, I'll be rewatching the webinar right after, so I'll be able to digest it all. And I'll do the transcript, which will be online in a couple of days. So anybody who doesn't really like listening but wants to read, the transcripts of this are usually quite readable, I hope. And if they're not, please do tell me. So thank you for all coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That was absolutely amazing. Two more things before everybody leaves. Number one is that next week we're looking at semantic HTML5, information architecture, and accessibility, which, to use the words from earlier on, they're not sexy and they're not cool, but they're super important and very powerful. And as Simon Cox said, there are so many missed opportunities. And he says he will share some of his worst missed opportunities, which I'm really looking forward to. Ross and Kim will be along as well. And I've been talking to them. They're full of things to say. And Kim especially just did a video that she's posted on LinkedIn all about accessibility. As she rightly says, we all have an accessibility issue. It's just that we need it for our eyes, and we tend to associate it with physical disabilities as opposed to just how do we actually access this information. And Google has a question of accessibility. How does it access the information? The other thing is about 15 minutes. I'm going to hook onto Periscope and see if that works as a kind of afters for a chat. If it works out, I'll do it every week. If it doesn't work out, I'll stop. So thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. See you next week for sexy semantic HTML5, interesting information architecture, and ACE accessibility. See you later.
Okay.